Good morning to you all. In the world of tiny decimals, if there is a tiny weeny beat on expectations for the UK government, we've just had it from the May GDP figure. Now, the headline figure, in fact, I'll tell you what, it's probably slightly worse on the month-by-month figure, better on the three-month figure. So it's a score draw, I'm afraid. The market will not see much solace from this. So the May GDP, negative 0.1%. The poll was for just by the same margin, positive, negative 0.1% month on month. Rachel Reeves would have been praying, hoping for something a little bit more optimistic there. The poll was for positive figures. So look, we are splitting hairs on tiny decimals, but it has moved in the wrong direction. GDP output up 0.7%. But the three-month figure, again, it's tiny better than expected. It is up 0.5% versus up 0.4. So by and large, not brilliant data as well. I'm going to just do one or two more pieces for you as well, because I think you need the detail. Manufacturing output was bang in line. Oh, beg your pardon. Manufacturing output is coming down. In fact, no. Manufacturing output looks dreadful. Down 1% versus a poll of negative 0.1%. So there you have it. Construction, big in negative territory, down 0.6%. That was disappointing. Services in line with expectations, up 0.8%. Look, I'm delighted because something amazing is happening. This is the first time I get to work with Ritika Gupta on CNBC. Now, you've been around the office for a while. You've been on air already. It's a real privilege to work with you. I'm really looking forward to many shows ahead as well. As I pour through the data, I'm trying to find something that Rachel Reeves can hang on to. I can't find it.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, especially looking at the May figure for GDP. As you mentioned, slightly below expectations, but they were expecting 0.1% GDP growth in May. So it's not that it was going to be great, but some improvement from perhaps that April figure, which was a negative,
Well, we had a confluence of events because we had loads of costs being piled on consumers, being passed on to companies. So the caution of April, we were hoping that had dissipated somewhat. Yeah, we were hoping because we had the US tariffs coming in. We also had the tax hikes in the UK, the stamp duty. So we were seeing, from the quarter one, which seemed quite optimistic growth. In April, we were seeing some reversal of that. So we thought maybe some improvement, but it looks like it's sluggish. And overall, that is what economists expect. It is a sluggish growth picture for the UK. They're expecting pretty much flat growth quarter over quarter. Let me ask you one question before I address it to a brilliant guest who's coming up next, who knows all about this kind of stuff as well. What are the ramifications of this, as you can see, either in market world or in politics world? Well, of course, Rachel Reeves, like you mentioned, will probably be clinging on to kind of any optimism on the growth front because she's put herself in such a difficult position with those fiscal rules. And, of course, she's going to be looking ahead to the autumn budget. They're concerned, economists, they think that headroom's probably evaporated or, come the autumn budget. So she's only going to have limited options, tax hikes, spending cuts. We know spending cuts are really difficult to put through. And both of those things, neither of them spur growth. All right, Ritika, I love and work with you so much. I want you to stay with me, and we'll speak to our next guest, because David Miles has joined us, a member of the Budget of Responsibility Committee at the Office for Budget Responsibility. David, I think at heart I'm a real optimist, but there are certain newspapers in the United Kingdom I can't read anymore because they are just so downbeat about the government. They are so downbeat about the UK. The question is, does this kind of data that we're seeing today endorse that negativity? Are we in a pickle in the UK?
Well, I've just heard the data that you've read out. So it sounded to me like it was, as you said yourself, pretty much in line with what market expectations were, maybe a smidge on the downside. The situation is very challenging. And at the OBR, we just put out sort of projections and assessments of fiscal risks, looking not just at what's happened this month, but actually looking 50 years down the road. And I think the picture there, and this has been true for a while, is that it's, in a fiscal sense, an extremely challenging position with a relatively big fiscal deficit, large stock of debt to GDP, interest rates have gone up, and lots of pressures if you look down the road, further down the road. Lots of pressures, upward pressures on government spending. So this is a very, very challenging position the UK is in.
David, we saw those I always thought it was really tough scenes to watch of the Chancellor of the Exchequer, a woman who has set her stall out on growth on the UK, who seemingly had the backing of her Prime Minister, now has kind of got the backing of her Prime Minister. We saw her, dare I say it, visibly upset in the House of Commons, and we think she's under a lot of attacks from different angles as well. Do you fear, though, that the strength of her proposition as proposed at the ballot box, at the dispatch box as well, is going to erode? And actually there are forces within the government now that are going to erode the position of the government and actually make the rules that she set out just virtually impossible to attain.
I don't think they're impossible to attain. And I think the Chancellor has been very consistent and very clear that she is determined to stay within the fiscal rules that the government has set. And I think what happened last week was, where we ended up was the Prime Minister saying that, the Chancellor is the Chancellor to stay. As I say, that's not impossible to stay within the fiscal rules. There are difficult choices. The government knows that. And we set out at the OBR not just the challenges in the near term, but the challenges looking much further ahead. And they are formidable. There's no doubt about that.
And David, you put out in your report earlier this week some stark warnings about the deficit, the debt. And in the UK, the national debt is nearly 100% of GDP. But if you compare the UK to other countries in Europe, like France and Italy, the debt to GDP ratio is a lot lower. So is it really that worrisome?
Well, the UK has come from a position, if you go back just before the financial crisis, where the stock of debt was about 30-odd% of GDP, and we've gone to 100. And some of those other countries you mentioned had a much higher stock of debt to GDP already. So the trajectory of the UK's debt to GDP ratio over recent years has been, in a sense, steeper and looks more challenging because of the rise in such a relatively short period of time in the big sweep of history. It's also true that although the other countries that you mentioned do have a higher debt to GDP ratio, the cost of debt for the UK is a bit higher, by a non-trivial amount, actually. The UK interest rates that the government's paying on its debt are, 1.5% more than those other countries, many countries across the G7, the richest countries in the world. The UK is about in the same place as the US. And if your interest rates are even 1% higher, but the stock of debt is 100% of GDP, in the long run, you're going to find that you're spending 1% more of GDP on interest costs. And for the UK, that would be, 30-odd billion pounds. So I think the fiscal situation is, at least as challenging as any of the other rich countries of the world. But you're right to point out that it's a very difficult situation pretty much right across the rich countries. So the fact that the UK isn't a complete outlier relative to other countries doesn't mean that the situation is less worrisome. We're in a sense, we're all kind of in a similar boat, but that boat's not in a good position.
And David, just to jump in there, I want to touch in on the OBR's growth forecasts, because they look very optimistic if you compare them to what the economists out there are looking for. I think it's 1.9% you're expecting 2026, 2027, 1.8%. Are you concerned about that this leaves much more room for downward risk if these forecasts are missed, and what that could do for Chancellor Rachel Reeves's headroom?
There's certainly risk, because if growth turns out to be, 0.5% weaker or 0.5% stronger, given the size of government tax revenues and its dependency on GDP, and also many elements of spending depend on GDP as well, there's a great sensitivity into the overall fiscal position for relatively small deviations from some central forecast. That's part of the reason why it's such a challenging position, that the headroom the government has got to stay the right side of its own fiscal targets is pretty small relative to the inevitable uncertainty about what GDP will be doing, and that drives the fiscal deficit. So that there's certainly risks. I think those risks are two-sided. Although you're right to say that the OBR has been more optimistic on growth, and some other forecasters, there's certainly a possibility that growth turns out to be even stronger. I mean, there's lots of things that have gone wrong for the UK over the last, well, almost 15 years now. The financial crisis, COVID, Brexit was probably a negative shock, and then the huge energy price increases. So just the absence of big negative shocks like that probably would improve the growth story relative to recent history. So I don't think it's all, the risks are not all on one side.
Yeah, look, that well-known smarty pants and actually good friend, Simon French at Pamir, has written the following. Unalloyed Lafarists to the right, evangelical wealth tax proponents to the left, they both deserve a wide berth. Hear, hear, smarty pants Simon. But the fact of the matter is, I'm more of a Lafarist understander than the unalloyed evangelical wealth tax brigade, David. I wouldn't be working this channel if I wasn't as well. Do you fear, though, that the Lafarists are being ignored and those who want wealth taxes are in the ascendancy?
Well, whether or not they're in the ascendancy, I'm not so sure about that. But I mean, there's certainly something to the argument that if you try and keep increasing the ratio of taxes to GDP and look for more and more taxes wherever you can find them, it's very likely that at some point you start creating so many disincentives for people to save, to invest, to work, that you start doing some serious damage to the growth potential of the economy, and it backfires on you. And it's also true that the ratio of tax to GDP in the UK is now getting to levels that we really haven't seen since the Second World War. So the scope to simply just raise more and more tax revenue is definitely limited. Whether one's the wrong side of a Laffer curve, I think, is much less clear.
David, we have to leave it there. We'll leave you to balmy, lovely Somerset. I can't think of anywhere lovelier. In fact, I can think of somewhere lovely. I'm going to the cricket today. But anyway, have a lovely time and enjoy the West Country. David Miles, thank you, sir, for joining us today. Member of the Budget Responsibility Committee, of course, at the Office for Budget Responsibility. Thank you. Lovely to see you today. And I'll see you throughout the show, I'm sure. Lovely to work with you and many more to come. Thank you for that.
Absolutely.